This program is presented by University of California Television. Like what you learn? Visit our website or follow us on Facebook and Twitter to keep up with the latest UCTV programs.
How do you empower the constituencies you serve and create a healthier community through the work that you do each day? So how do you empower your constituencies and create a healthier community through the work that you do? And I'll start again with D'Artagnan.
All right. So at SGLI, our mission is to improve the education, health, and well-being of youth and communities of color, specifically by empowering them to enact social change through research, training, and community mobilization. We focus on what's called health equity. For us, health equity is about closing disparities and closing the gap between those who do have access to resources and those who do not. We believe that all communities should have access to fresh, whole foods, to clean and safe open spaces, as well as quality medical care. In our work, we're committed to helping people build capacity so they can make sort of choices in their lives based on the opportunities that are available that are in their own best interests. We define food justice as communities exercising their right to grow, sell, and eat healthy food that is fresh, nutritious, affordable, culturally appropriate, grown locally, with care for the land, for the people, and the animals. And so one of the ways that we work to empower our community members and our residents is first by listening to them. So part of our core values is to privilege their voice and to ensure that the things we do are the things they want to do. Right? So we're able to bring skills and resources to the table, but at no point do we go to folk in our own community, in the community I'm from, and tell them this is what they need to do. What we also work to do is develop social justice youth leaders. And so we have a curriculum for our young folk where they participate throughout the entire year in classes that are actually located in their schools, where they learn about social justice issues that are relevant to them. And then they're also able to become critical youth researchers who go out and teach others about what they've both discovered, but conduct research in their community so they can tell their own story. So it's important for us to not speak for people, but to ensure that they can speak for themselves. And then we also have a summer youth fellowship program called Urban Health Fellows, where we work with African American Latino males to help them become peer advocates, where they go into the community. They not only conduct this research that I mentioned earlier, but they teach their peers about the challenges they're facing, about the rising rates of diet-related diseases. In Inglewood, roughly 47.8% of our students are classified as either being obese or overweight. And that's a significant challenge. When we expect by 2020 that every 1 in 2 African Americans and close to 1 in 2 Latino students or youth will have diabetes. That's a problem in our communities. And I think one of the strategies that we've been able to utilize is having our young folk actually lead the charge, have them talk to their peers, talk to their parents. We also have what's called healthy lifestyle centers, where our community members are able to participate in health and nutrition courses and classes. They learn how to grow their own food. They learn how to plant fruit trees. We've distributed 4,600 fruit trees, creating more food assets in our community. We've also been able to plant 400 shade trees, addressing urban heat island effect in our community as well, and have people have spaces to come together in community, both through these healthy lifestyle centers and the gardens that we're building. And so for us, it's a combination of a few things. It's making sure that people have access to skills and access to resources, but it's also ensuring that their voice is prioritized in the process, and then providing the support that's necessary to enact change within the community. So it's fundamentally about lifting up people in our community so that they can lead.
So I think there's probably a reason why Dart and I are both on the leadership board of the LA Food Policy Council. And the work that he and Social Just Learning Institute is doing in Inglewood is very similar to our sort of philosophy and theory of social change, right? So we believe at the Food Chain Workers Alliance that those who are marginalized, those who are facing the problems and issues in their communities and their workplaces should be the ones in the leadership developing the solutions to those problems and organizing, right, to make those changes. And so the work that we do is really supporting the work of our member organizations. We have 23 member groups around the country. Some are representing farm workers, others are organizing with food, meat and poultry processing workers, warehouse workers, grocery workers, restaurant workers, street vendors, all throughout the chain. And so we support their organizing campaigns, right? Through organizing campaigns, these workers are making changes in their communities, in their workplaces, you know, winning raises in the minimum wage, higher living wages in their workplaces. And we also support the leadership development of these workers. So we have an annual worker leaders retreat where we bring together these worker leaders from our different member organizations, and they share their experiences, they share their stories, they get to know each other and really build this movement of food workers, right? Because you need to develop those relationships to build a movement. And so at those retreats, we also invite folks to share their skills, lead workshops, learn how to tell their stories, similar to what you were talking about, Dart, right? To be able to speak up for themselves and to talk about what are the solutions that they want to work towards and what can the Alliance do to support that. So they're part of planning for what we do in the Alliance. And at our retreat last year, they came up with this idea of a new training program so that they can learn more in depth about what are the issues facing all the workers throughout the food system, not just workers in their own sector, and also what is this food justice movement and how can they get connected? What are the other issues that they themselves face but maybe haven't made the connections yet to their issues as workers? And so we're going to be starting a pilot program this year. In addition, they want to learn about the history of the food system. How have we gotten to where we are today, and how has race and labor and class, gender issues all played into why we have this current, corporate industrial food system that's exploiting workers and the environment in our communities, and then how can we organize to turn that around? So that's a little bit of what we're doing.
Para nosotros es más trabajar en la área con madres de familia. Muchos de los talleres que tenemos es más participación de las mamás.
So in our area, we work more with parents, family in their families, and we basically work a lot with the mothers.
Es donde tenemos nosotros la oportunidad de hablar sobre qué son nuestros derechos, que tanto en el trabajo o en la vivienda, que tenemos derechos no por ser comunidades donde la limitación del lenguaje es algo que no les dejamos saber que no nos limite a luchar por la justicia, por lo que uno ve que es injusto en el campo o en la vivienda.
So we basically try to work with them in issues related to housing, not only to issues in the field, and we also try to educate them that because they don't speak the language, they don't have rights. They have rights to a decent job, they have rights to housing.
En los talleres tenemos varios diferentes centros donde tenemos a nuestras compañeras promotoras que tienen ese contacto directo con cada una de las familias.
We have several centers where our co-workers who are promoters have direct contact with the families.
Es donde tenemos la oportunidad de hablar de lo importante de la nutrición, de poder llevar a una persona para informarle, educarlos, de que dejarles saber que ahorita lo que es la obesidad, la diabetes, están mucho en las comunidades latinas. Entonces hablamos de eso, de la importancia de cuidar nuestra nutrición.
So we basically talk about nutrition, and we also talk about obesity, diabetes, which are issues very common in our Latin community. So we try to educate them around those issues.
Pero a la vez tratamos también dejarles saber que nuestra comida, de no olvidarte de la comida, de cómo nosotros en nuestras comunidades preparábamos nuestras comidas saludables. No se puede a veces conseguir los mismos productos o la verdura, se puede decir, pero podemos todavía hacer como algunas cosas que se pueden todavía conseguir aquí.
So we also try to educate them about how to cook, foods that are typical of our communities, which are really healthy, and even though sometimes we cannot get the right products or the ingredients, but that we can still cook healthy.
Esa es la oportunidad de que nosotros podemos dejar saber la importancia de poder cuidar nuestra nutrición, de poder a veces dejarles saber dónde pueden conseguir algunos productos o algunas verduras que pueden hacer, que pueda uno hacer la comida que uno acostumbra.
So this is mainly what we try to make them see, and also we give them information about where they can find some produce that is typical of our traditional food, so that they can have a better nutrition.
Siempre también tratamos de motivar a nuestras mamás que entre más información tengamos, es una manera de poder abrir la mente, pero también de aprender a vivir en un país muy diferente, donde aquí hay leyes que a veces en nuestras comunidades a veces no existen o no hay estas leyes, donde uno tiene que aprender para poder tener una mejor vida, aprender a respetarlas.
So we also try to work with the mothers and make them understand that sometimes in this country there are laws that are very different from the laws in our communities, and that we have to learn how to respect those laws and also to use them for our wellness and well-being.
So I think the question is really a great question, in that I won't speak about how we're directly affecting the change, but how we're influencing the change and what we believe in and what we're doing as an organization right now to engage community. This past winter and this spring, our organization and the Center for Community Engagement at CSUCI, Channel Islands State University, Channel Islands, together with the Health Communications course, has been working on a project that's known as Rescatando Nuestra Dieta Tradicional para una Mejor Salud. That means restoring our traditional diet to create greater health. We began by asking community, first of all, two questions. ¿Qué es lo que comías en tu comunidad? What is it that you used to eat in your community? And when we're speaking about community, it's community back home in Oaxaca, your homeland. ¿Cómo cambió tu dieta al estar aquí? How did your diet change while being here? And we ask these questions in order to really remember the value of our diets and what it has to influence in community, and how can you conserve these traditions, and where do they come from? And so that we can conserve them, continue to conserve them, so we can continue to teach it to our children and their children to their children. We came up with a couple recipe examples just to throw out a little bit of what this context means. So there's a couple of things that I've noticed. There's, for example, a recipe could be quelite, salsa, frijol en agua, or calabazas, ejotes en salsa verde, or tayutos. They're kind of like asparagus with some salsa and tasojo. You see, in Oaxaca, their diet really does consist of frijoles, guisos, kind of like stir fries, and what is seasonally available. So through those practices, you're able to really reach out to where nurtures you through the abundance of the time. So during the months of May through October, that's the time when there's a lot of greens and it's really growing and the forest is really abundant and there's a lot of plants and greens and herbs. And there's plants like pepiches and pápalos and elotes and ejotes and cilantro and rábanos and salsa and pollo and hongos and berros and frailes and lechugas and hierba santa, and the list goes on and on. And this is, for example, in the Sierra Mixtic range of Tlaxioco, there's a lot of access to what's sustainably there. It's already growing in abundance every day through the forest. You go and you harvest the crickets and the ants. I've tried them, they're delicious. And anything like that. And you share it with community and you share it with your family. I'm sure all of you care about your own personal health, but I'm sure you also have your family and you also have a community tied to that. So when we speak about sustainability, it's not only how it's affecting community, but how it's affecting you, because everything's interrelated. And just to let you know a little bit about the indigenous community of Oaxaca and Guerrero and Puebla, and these Mexican indigenous people, and generally, they're deeply rooted in sustainable practices already. There's great ancestral wisdom, ancient wisdom, that goes back centuries. And so when we really take a look at that, we're able to really practice. If we were really to use as an example or as a source of inspiration, we'd be able to create greater sustainable practices. And so, but unfortunately, as we know, that's vastly disappearing due to NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement, as we all know. Farmers who used to sell, Irene was talking to me on the road, that used to grow your own food, are no longer able to compete with big monoculture farmers who come into the territories. We have some of the richest and most biodiverse areas in the world. And so with that, this is creating a huge flux in migration. And so the flux is also affecting ancestral lands and tradition itself. And so our community is shifting their cultural practices as they come to the US. So no longer are they able to keep their traditional ways of living. They have to adjust to new ways. They have to navigate unstable working environments. They earn minimum wage in order to survive. At the same time, they're learning to navigate the social, educational, legal, and medical systems without the help of their native language. In our organization, we really do. All of our staff, 90% of our staff is indigenous and speaks the native language in order to support our community. So even though they're working the very lands that sustain everyone else, it is not sustaining them. And so the food that they should be able to access, accessible organic food or traditional food, there isn't enough green spaces, not even in our backyards, little in like the city. And they earn less than $15,000, less than $20,000 a year. So that means every week you're having to spend around $150 to $250 a week just to buy food itself. And most of it, from what I learned, is the food that you harvested yourself. You're not even able to buy that. So it's very costly. It affects, as we know, every level. And then the most sad thing about this is that back in Oaxaca and Guerrero and Puebla, these communities are constantly being bombarded by Coca-Cola, by Sabritas. It's easier to go ahead and get a cup of Coca-Cola or something than to get access to clean water. Or it's easier to get a bag of Sabritas and some chips. We see it here as would be known as the ghetto, as some chetos, some Cheetos, than to be able to grab fruits and vegetables on the go. So I was recently in Sonora, Mexico, and there I was able to go to the local markets and the local grocery stores, and guess what I saw? I saw mountains and piles of pears and fruits and vegetables, and they were all the ones that were discarded from the United States and sold there for almost double the price. And they were bruised and they were old, and there's a whole bunch of things in it, and most likely I'm sure they're genetically modified, and that's another issue in itself. But really, our question is really how has really revolved right now on how do we restore traditional practices? How do we bring that indigenous wisdom back? How do we bring it in so that we value those ways and are able to enhance community? And also, we know that we're never going to reach an idealized way of living and eating and cooking because those very vegetables, herbs are no longer accessible here. They're being shipped. When I get to be able to share on a table with my colleagues and I'm able to eat those chicatanes, those little ants, they had to be shipped up from Oaxaca. And that's the only reason I'm able to do that. But we're losing those spaces. And so what we've learned more recently is that we're in the process of creating a Mystic Cultural Heritage Cookbook so that the families, we've been able to serve with the families, we've been able to restore some of that, and there's a couple markets that you can still find these ingredients. And just time-wise, I just want to say that we do have to maintain, continue to save our seeds, continue to teach our young, and continue to gather wisdom from our elders. And the more we learn about what sustains us, the more we learn about ourselves. Thank you so much for your time.
So before I talk about what I do, I think I want to talk a little bit about why I do it, because intentions are really, really important in informing our passions and continuing the work that we do, and especially as young advocates and activists in making sure we don't hit burnout, because they continually remind you of why you have those early mornings and late nights. So as a Muslim, we have a annual month, well obviously, it's a month, one out of the year, where we fast from dusk to dawn. And since the Islamic calendar is a lunar calendar, it changes throughout the year. So we fast from sometimes 3:30 a.m. to 8 p.m., like this year, when the day was about 16 or 17 hours long. And you don't just do that for one day or two, you do that for 30 days. And you stay away from food and drink, and you're supposed to be the best version of yourself that you can be, and it's kind of a training opportunity for you to really evaluate yourself and why you do what you do and just make yourself a better person. And during these days, oh man, you really feel the hunger. And the whole point of Ramadan is so that you can empathize with the people that have less than yourself. What I find as I grow older and I'm part of different social circles is that we spend all day hungry and thirsty, and then we all get together around a table of extravagant food and just feast until we all hit a food coma. And that is totally beyond and missing the point of what Ramadan is supposed to be about. And I didn't really understand how intense hunger was for people who actually experience it on a day-to-day basis until I visited my home country of Pakistan last year. I had gone back after 18 years, and so it was a very surreal experience for me. And right now, like, you know, there are places in California where hunger is very apparent, and then there are places in California where hunger is disguised. When you go to a developing country, it is very clear who is hungry and who is not. And I was able to see people that were in my family that lived in these beautiful homes, and then people that were also part of my family that lived in the most decrepit and horrible housing conditions that they could. And what's worse than that is you see people on the streets who don't have arms or eyes or legs that are begging for just food to eat. And I came back and I've been thinking about this experience for the last year. I've been thinking about why I do the work I do and how I can kind of help the circle of people that I'm in. And I know that as an activist and as an advocate, I can't change everybody's life. Like, I'm very realistic about the impact that I can make. But I think that if we allow cynicism to prevent us from contributing any little change that we can make, then we really have missed our opportunity for social change. So as a student region, I decided that, you know, hunger was a priority of mine. You know, I come from an immigrant family. My father's family was incredibly poor in Pakistan, and my grandfather had to travel very far distances and move far away to be able to work to support my family. And I'm sitting in front of you because my father got this 1 in a million scholarship to come to the United States, and then he moved his family here. So I think about poverty and hunger a lot, because if it weren't for that scholarship, if it weren't for one or two things that happened in my life or in my history, then I would have been one of those people that not only has to fast for 30 days out of the year, but 365 days out of the year, and that is the reality for the majority of the world out there. So when I came back to Berkeley, I started thinking about what we need to do, and already the food pantry was established at that time, and we had students that were slowly growing in numbers and coming and telling us that they really appreciated the work that Berkeley was doing, that they really needed food. And I have to say, it's an interesting experience when you have a peer come up and tell you that they're dealing with hunger issues. Because your first reaction is just one of horror and sadness and just despair, because you just think, I want to help you, what can I do to help you, and what can I do to make sure that you don't ever go hungry again? But it's also interestingly empowering, because you realize that you are in this position for a reason, and that the work that you do is not meaningless. It really means a lot. And even if you can make sure that one more person is fed through whatever effort you can contribute, you've done your job as a human being. So I know that what I have control over is my current surroundings, and as a student regent, I have access to resources and administration and data and a number of people that sometimes don't realize that hunger is a very, very prominent thing on college campuses. When I talk to the media about this, they're completely horrified. Like, they literally are speechless that students at the UC in particular are couch surfing or showering at the gyms or living out of their cars. And what's even harder about this is that, and this is actually horrible, but I'm gonna come out and say it, it's an awkward conversation for folks in power to have, because now it's not, the community that everyone thinks is going hungry anymore. It's not just, the marginalized communities of color that are going hungry now. Now it's an awkward conversation for a lot of administrators and a lot of people in power, because now it's the middle class that is also experiencing this hunger. And I think that this conversation is long overdue, right? This has happened for so long, but we need to continue to make sure that we are addressing the structures that can make this easy for all of our students. So a big part of what we do is we sit down with financial aid, we sit down with dining services, we sit down with student affairs, and we try to learn what their processes are like. How do you give out aid? How do you set your budget? What is it that you already do, and how do we make your processes better? So I'll give one quick example. I know my time is kind of running out. One of the examples is, right now there is a survey that goes out every 3 years, and students report how much money that they budget for food. So they'll say we spend $10 a day, $15 a day, whatever, for our food budget. Now, this goes back to the Office of the President, and then they distribute this data back to the campuses. The campuses average these numbers, and then they set the food budget for financial aid of how much they're going to package out to students. At Berkeley, that number is $9.50 per day for the entire day. That is nowhere near being close to being able to encompass an entire meal. And so what we're doing now is we're working with the Office of the President to see, are we able to do some kind of regional market analysis to see what the actual budget is like, and does that match up with the current numbers that we already have? So what I've learned through all of this is that addressing hunger is way beyond just providing direct services. It's actually addressing the entire structure that allows hunger to even happen. And I hope and I pray that 5 years, 10 years down the line, that we don't need to have conversations about folks that are going hungry, that we don't need to express how urgently we need food pantries and emergency food relief programs on our campus, because ideally we want to eradicate hunger, right? We want to eradicate hunger, we want to heal malnourishment, but we're not there yet. And so these conversations are really important to continue having, and I hope that this summit can serve as a breeding ground for all of those inspirational conversations. But that's a little bit of what I do, why I do it, and I'm hoping that all of you will join me in this effort. Thank you.
And just before Melissa starts, if you do have any questions, please go ahead and start passing up those index cards. Try not to walk in front of the camera, so walk around the outside as you bring these up. But please start bringing these up as we hear from our last panelists. Sure. Thank you, Melissa.
So I want to tell you a little bit more also about why I do what I do. And it can't go without saying that I'm Jewish Colombian. I was born in Colombia. I was raised in Miami. I was born to a woman who was blonde and green-eyed. And everybody I knew up to 13 years old was Jewish Colombian. So that's kind of a strange way to see the world when you're a kid and you get to the rest of the world. Or you get to California and you find out you're white. That was a surprise for me, because here in Santa Barbara we have a lot of Hispanics, which are mostly Mexican, and then we have a lot of white people, and then we have the 0.01%, that's everybody else. So we have a lot of conversations that are that we have yet to have. But during this whole time, the language that we have in my family is about food. Because if you know anything about Jews and you know anything about Colombians, we like to eat. That's for certain. And so whenever we would get together as a family and whenever we'd be together, the thing that I always talked about was the environment. And my parents, through that, they supported me and they didn't really get it. And then as I studied the environment, and I worked with the Nature Conservancy and the Environmental Defense Center, the focus of these organizations was actually on agriculture and on food policy. And that really surprised me because I thought we were going to talk about climate change and ag land, or just ecological land preservation. But as it turned out, they're one and the same. And so even though my background was in environment, you can't do environmental work without recognizing the implications of the agricultural system. Along those lines, a lot of people in Santa Barbara especially, we have these high hopes for where the environmental, like the well-being of our environment. And at the same time, we have so many people living in poverty that how are we going to even have conversations about recycling when people haven't been fed? And so going back to Katie's question about how do we empower our community, above the executive director's office at the food bank, there's 3 posters, and they say, nourish, teach, empower. But empowerment really starts with the nourishment, because if anybody comes to one of our food distributions, they're welcomed with a smile, with dignity, and the opportunity for education. And that message and feeling is present in every single person at the food bank and in every single one of our programs. And we want to give as many resources as possible, but sometimes people aren't ready to receive them if they're still in the nourish part. And that's a conversation that is hard sometimes to have with foundations or with other organizations when they're like, go and do this, go and do that. And it's like, well, they are still working 3 jobs, so we want them to come to community meetings if they want to, and I'm working on that. But sometimes we just need to offer the food first. And I think empowerment starts with building those relationships and understanding where people are at and meeting people where they're at. And sometimes it's just asking them how their day was, not asking them to come to a rally.
Thank you all for those wonderful pearls of wisdom. So we'll go ahead to the questions from the audience. The first question is for Vanessa Turan, and this is, Oaxaca is the state where the majority of immigrants come from in California. How has this affected the health of the immigrants, their families, both born in Oaxaca and the U.S., in regards to the modernization of food? Are they less healthy in the U.S. than they would be in Oaxaca?
I think this is a good question for me and my colleague in general. We did a research study in Oxnard, California that showed that a lot of this community is high in diabetes and other cardiovascular diseases due to, in Oaxaca, there wasn't really a use for oils, which is highly used now. There's also greater access to meats, fish, crab, all the other meats in general, whereas there was only access once in a while if you had the money to buy the meat. So there's a huge change in that increase, and we've been able to assess it through a health study, basically. So there is a huge change, and I think it's because there was much more access to fruits and vegetables back home than there is here. And the fruits and vegetables that are grown here, if you want them to be organic, they're like $2, I don't know, it's like $2, $3 per $6 for a packet of blueberries, right? That comes in this little tiny ounces. And how much does the person get paid to be able to harvest these? I know them because they're my friends and they work, and they're not even able to buy those very blueberries that we consider healthy, and that are organic in some way or another. So it's directly affecting their health every day. And then our children are also being fed an Americanized diet at school. So it's like hamburgers and pizza and fries, French fries, and they're no longer. Irene was telling me that her children really love pizza, and she traditionally cooks a lot of her meals in traditional ways. And how do you balance that out? It's like my child is growing up in this Americanized system where it's cool to go to Jack in the Box or wherever it is that kids want to go to nowadays. and not cool to bring your lunch pail at home with your traditional meal. I remember being a child and not wanting to bring my burrito to school. I wanted a PB&J and I wanted an apple in my little lunchbox. I wanted to be a normal kid, right? But no, so there is a huge change in diet, and we can continue to talk about what that looks like in the follow-up conversation if that helps. And no sé si querías contribuir algo sobre cómo ha cambiado la dieta en Oaxaca y aquí.
Como estaba diciendo, en Oaxaca es la oportunidad de poder consumir lo que hay, ¿no? Lo que tienes a la mano. No hay restaurantes cerca donde vives que vendan comida rápida. Entonces, cuando llegas aquí empiezas a ver ese cambio de dieta, porque el trabajo aquí sí, mamá y papá tienen que trabajar. Allá en Oaxaca la mayor parte del papá es el que trabajaba.
Entonces, sorry, wrong language. So basically, as I mentioned earlier, in Oaxaca we have access to a lot of more organic foods. We don't have access to restaurants, to fast food restaurants. So when we come here, we also, besides that access to this type of food, the mother and the father have to work. And so, while in Oaxaca, only the father works and the mother can have more time to cook.
Entonces, llegan aquí y empezamos a consumir más, como empiezas a ver, aquí puedo consumir más carne que yo no consumía allá. Empiezas a verle como que es algo grande, o lo ves como algo, un cambio, ¿no? Bueno, pero a la vez no es bueno.
So you get here and you see that you can actually consume meat, and you see this is a change, which is great, but at the same time it's not good.
Porque la carne es más barata. Aquí puedes conseguir una hamburguesa por $2 o algo así. Empieza una bolsa de verduras que suele ser más caro.
So because here meat is cheaper, you can get a hamburger for $2, but a bag of vegetables is more expensive.
También el horario. Trabajamos mucho como trabajadores del campo. A veces trabajamos 10 horas, trabajamos 12 horas. Entonces, ¿en qué tiempo vas a tener oportunidad de cocinar? A veces lo que haces es, pues, paso aquí, compro una pizza de $5. Yeah.
So, also our working schedule, we work 10-hour, 12-hour days, and so we don't have time to cook. So what do? You drop by and buy a $5 pizza on your way home, and that's what happens.
Thank you. The next question is, what questions do you think need to be asked to assess the needs of university students and local communities in regards to food and food justice? And that could go to any panelist.
I feel like people are looking at me. No, totally not. Like I said, I'm totally new to this, so definitely panelists, please add on. I think we just haven't even asked the most basic questions, right? I think we need to assess the demographic, so what family you come from, what your financial bracket is roughly, so we can understand what the demographic looks like. But also we need to ask, how much do you budget for food, or do you budget for food? Have you taken, any kind of classes that will help you budget? Do you know how to read a nutritional label? Do you know where to go? Do you know basic things fun fact, if you qualify for work study, you also qualify for CalFresh. People don't know these kinds of things. And so I think we need to do a demographic understanding of who our population is. But also we need to ask whether they know if a lot of these resources are even available, and how, as providers or as advocates, we can do a better job in advocating for their needs. I think we need to ask them what they need first before we can kind of craft a strategy on how do we address it. And that's also part of the work that students are doing now, is trying to understand what does the need look like for students, so that we can better develop a response.
Next question is, you have one first? Okay.
I just wanted to add, I think it would also be important to ask students, what are the values that you want your food to reflect, right? Do you want food that is produced by workers who are paid fairly, a living wage? Do you want food that is produced in an environmentally sustainable way, food that is local, or just all the different issues that we're talking about?
The next question is, what U.S. or California state policies need to change in order to support your goals for the food system reform? All of them? Dr. Tandon, do you want to start?
Sure, yeah. So, both Joanne and I serve on the Los Angeles Food Policy Council, and I also serve on the California Food Policy Council, where there has been this amazing movement of youth leaders and community leaders who are advocating very diligently for change in our food system. California, in many ways, I think, is leading the way in this regard. There are things that need to happen in our communities. For example, folk need to ensure that, we need to have policies that ensure people have the right to grow their own food. Depending on where you live, it might not be legal, actually, for you to grow food in your own home or in your own backyard. Now, fortunately, we worked on AB 2561 last year, which made it legal for tenants who live in single-family homes or in duplexes or in a homeowners association to grow food either in a portable container or in a small plot of land. Your landlord can't stop you from doing that, but they can certainly tell you where to put it, right? But just think about that for a second. If we're talking about food sovereignty and sustainability and the ability to care for your family or care for the land, and you don't even have the right to grow food in your own home, that's a problem. Right? So I think it first starts with acknowledging our sovereignty and acknowledging the need that we have to feed ourselves so that we know where our food comes from. We can begin to build connections again to that food and then advocate for the care of the land and the people who are also growing that food. So that's one area that needs to change. I think there are many others that need to change, namely how we treat our farm workers and the wages we pay people. I mean, I've been saying this before. I've said this recently, and I'll just say this again. Much of what we're talking about boils down to the economy and economic inequities that exist. And so if we do things like allow for record corporate profits to exist, but then we also depress wages, people are not going to be able to care for themselves, not going to be able to purchase the food that they need in order to eat healthy and live healthy lives. So we have to do things both in our sort of food system as well, but we got to appreciate the economic disparities that exist, which contribute to these gaps that continue to exacerbate diet-related diseases as well.
I'm still Obviously, for us, one of the main policies that we advocate for is raising the minimum wage. So I think Dart spoke very eloquently about the need for that. And for those of you at UCLA, you might know that in Los Angeles now there's a movement to raise the minimum wage there. I feel like LA is. There's been studies coming out. Just yesterday I saw for the typical Angelino to actually afford rent, they would need to be paid $33 per hour. And there's more people living in poverty in LA than anywhere else, but we still, just following the state minimum wage, which currently is $9 per hour. So, so that's a very important issue. We're also we think there should be universal health care for everyone, right? That health care is a right, and that impacts everyone's health and ability to also take care of themselves. So those are, and lastly, to add that, like farm workers aren't outside of California and Washington State actually aren't covered by laws that allow them the right to organize and to take collective action. And even workers who are protected by that law, it's very easy for employers to fire them, to threaten them and discipline them. And so we think those laws need to change too, to better protect workers and ensure all workers are protected by that right to take collective action, because that's really what's going to build their, build democratic workplaces and communities.
Wonderful.
So earlier this year, there was an article published by Mark Bittman and Ricardo Salvador, and I really wish that Nikki from This Morning would have been an author on that paper, because we need more voices on it, especially women. But it was a call for a national reform to food policy in the Farm Bill, and when you have a Farm Bill that advocates for a sick society, like in terms of wellness, then how you can't have a healthy one. So seeing these men come together and ask the government and just put it there, for the whole news media to say, yes, this is what we're going for, this is what we need, these are the changes that need to happen. I applauded them for doing that.
The next question is, as a child of Oaxacan immigrants, what advice would you give me as to how to teach my parents about sustainability and that their ways in Oaxaca are better than those here?
Yo lo estoy tratando de hacer, lo que estoy tratando de poder dejar saber a mis hijas es la manera en que yo crecí, ¿no? Cómo crecí en Oaxaca, cómo a veces la comida que consumíamos no era la comida que cosechábamos, e incluso mismo yo misma doy el ejemplo de poder cocinar una salsa que agarro tomate y chile y hago un huevo sin grasa.
So basically what I'm doing is trying to teach my daughters about what my life during my childhood in Oaxaca, how we ate, how we actually ate directly what we harvested. Mm-hmm. So for example, I tried to make a salsa with tomatoes and chili and maybe with an egg that doesn't have fat.
También estoy como parte, como les había comentado, estar en un jardín comunitario, que ellos vean cómo se planta, ¿no? Cómo se plantan las verduras, cómo se cosecha. Entonces es algo que da oportunidad a ellos de que vean, oh sí, es importante la comida sin pesticidas.
So as I mentioned before, in my work as a volunteer at a community garden, I teach them how to plant, how to harvest, and how you can actually grow vegetables without pesticides.
Las maneras que yo hago para que mis hijas vean esta oportunidad de poder consumir más verduras. Tratamos de hacer que coman más verduras, aunque a veces siempre a los niños no les agrada, ¿no? Ni al adulto tampoco, pero tienes que ponerlo como parte de tu alimento, que es importante.
So that's what I do as part of my education. I try them to get them to eat more vegetables, and we all know children don't like vegetables, but I try to make it a point that we eat healthy.
Our next question, there's an ongoing stigma with students about being homeless, couch surfing, receiving food stamps, and more. What can be done to reduce this stigma?
So one of the things that the food bank's done is we have started to do food distributions in the form of healthy school pantries, which are like health fairs. And when someone arrives, they go through this corridor of services, and it's welcoming, and it's generally services that are needed by families. But we talked with Alan Hancock recently to see if that was a model that would apply at the college level campus, different services, but still more focused on health. And as part of that, they would receive food. There would be some element of food distribution, but it wasn't just that we're focused on health and wellness.
Yeah, I happened to be one of those students at the time when I started undergrad at UCLA. Coming from Los Angeles or South LA, I didn't have access to resources, right? I didn't have a family member I could pick up the phone and call. And in fact, because I was receiving financial aid, they would often call me and say, hey, can you help us out? We don't have anything to eat. And so having been in that situation, I understand how difficult it was. I would work 30 to 40 hours a week at In-N-Out, right? Sometimes that would be my only meal for the day. So I know how challenging it can be as a student to go through that. And I think one of the strategies that I was able to utilize to both get support that I needed, but to also be okay with that, was to approach my counselors, right? I had this amazing counselor, two actually. One was named Shelley Benton, and our academic supports or academic services in our College of Letters and Science at UCLA, who took the time to get to know me, to get to know my needs, and to understand what those needs were, and provided advice and direction. The other person was Masai Mentors in the Academic Advancement Program at UCLA, who did the same. So it was by building relationships with these ombudsmen, so to speak, these people on our campuses who interact directly with students, and letting me know about the resources that were available, that I was able to get the support I needed. And I think in many ways that it starts with, and I think most of the panelists here will probably agree, but it starts and ends with relationships. If you don't have relationships with students in the institution, or you don't have relationships with people in the community, or you're not able to build solid relationships with each other, you're not going to get good work done. And so I think it's beginning to focus on, so if we want to get through stigma, you got to start building relationships with those who are in need, but having the mechanisms to do that and be able to scale up the systems that are discovered through those processes.
Wonderful. Our next question will be in Spanish, so our translator will read that one for us.
Irene, esta es la pregunta, me dice si necesita que la repita. ¿Cómo ha afectado a las comunidades indígenas la modernización de Oaxaca? No solamente en la cosecha, pero también en remedios naturales, parteras, curanderos. ¿Piensa que los remedios naturales se están perdiendo y como la comida de Oaxaca ayuda a la gente de edad mayor que a los jóvenes, a diferencia de los jóvenes y los niños? So I will try to interpret the question into English, and it's Irene. How has modernization in Oaxaca affected the indigenous communities, not only in the harvesting, but also in natural remedies for midwives? Do you think that natural remedies are being lost? And also, how does food in Oaxaca help not only children and youth, but older people? ¿Te la repito? No.
Sí, así como ha afectado el cambio de comida que estamos, o el cambio de dieta que estamos teniendo aquí, también los remedios caseros. Una de las razones es que nos dejan saber que respetan mucho los remedios caseros, pero es importante también tratar de aprender las medicinas que aquí se dan, como el Tylenol.
So, you know, can you hear me? Okay, so when we get here, the changes are not only in food, but also, for example, in home remedies. So it's important to try to keep those home remedies, to try to get the ingredients, but also to learn about the local remedies like Tylenol.
Estamos tratando, nosotros como en la parte de la organización, les estamos dando unas clases sobre el cuidado básico de cómo cuidar a sus hijos, donde les dejamos saber que a veces es importante que no usar muchos remedios naturales. Les damos la opción porque puede ser algo que puede perjudicar la salud del niño.
So one thing that we do in our centers is to educate the parents about health care and well-being. And so we tell them sometimes that there could be some danger in some home remedies and to be careful in what they give to their children.
Y sabemos también que muchas de nuestras familias al igual a lo mejor siguen usando sus remedios, pero una manera como tener más cuidado, ¿no? De poder ir más al doctor con los niños para asegurarse de que pues tengo que usar medicinas que no lleguen a afectar la salud de mi hijo.
So we also try to teach them that it's okay to use these home remedies, but also to take their children to the doctor to make sure that our care doesn't affect the health of our children.
So eso es prácticamente lo que nosotros estamos haciendo, pero ya la decisión a veces es de que sí se va perdiendo los remedios, porque es algo difícil en que uno tiene que lidiar en que qué es lo que voy a darle un té de manzanilla o mejor voy a darle algún jarabe. So, entonces los padres de familia son los que a veces tienen que decidir eso.
So we try to teach them, but also the ultimate decision is on the parents. Am I going to give them a chamomile tea, or am I going to give them a syrup? So it's up to each family at a point.
Thank you. The next question is, how come a hamburger and fries cost less than a head of broccoli? Sorry, I'm going to repeat that question. How come a hamburger and fries cost less than a head of broccoli? Melissa?
Sure, I'll do my best with this. So the Farm Bill funds, subsidizes food that makes that possible. That is the shortest answer. And so when Katie asked, what are the policies that need to change? And I say all of them. It's because how are we funding corn syrup, hamburgers, French fries, the oil that goes into French fries, all of those things, and then an organic farmer can't get a subsidy. And it comes from those federal policies And a lot of people aren't voting. Let me speak about that just for a second. So I don't know if all of you voted in the last election or in the midterms elections, but if you didn't and you can, please do, and please vote for the policies that will change that.
The next question, also on international policy, is NAFTA is an example of a financial incentive to divest of local food independence. Similar financial trends are well established in the first world countries and in university food systems. Are there financial incentives or economic models that could work the other way, other than patches such as charitable food handouts?
You know, I think it's the million-dollar question. Really what I hear in that question is, what can we do to shift our local food, shift to a local food system, right? I mean, that's fundamentally what it's about. And often what you'll find, since I grow food in the community and we have a community-supported agriculture program, we have been wrestling with this for quite some time. What I find is that institutions like UC Santa Barbara, UCLA, UC Berkeley, et cetera, LAUSD, et cetera, they all have issues with scale, right? So to feed 750,000 students in LAUSD, you have to be able to source enough food each day to do that, and it has to be at such a cost that allows you to meet the needs of all those students. Same thing here at these institutions. And so in Los Angeles, the LA Food Policy Council proposed something called the Good Food Purchasing Pledge, which commits these institutions to purchasing from local growers and local owners and sourcing their food as much as possible from our own region. And I think those types of activities have to occur if we're going to shift from these larger sort of socio-political systems that are destroying in many ways our food system. And yes, I agree that we are incentivized to purchase from other countries and whatnot. And we also have to appreciate what that does and how it also helps to lift, it can contribute to, but it can also lift people out of poverty. So I think it's about sort of taking a step back, looking at the systems approach, or taking a systems approach to understanding scale, and then figuring out how we're going to relocalize our food systems if we're actually going to achieve equity and close those disparities.
Just to add, I think most of you probably know about the Real Food Challenge that the UC system has signed on to, and you'll hear, I know there's workshops going on, and so it's been an effort by students in the UCs to shift the food purchases of the UC system, right? So that's another example. Well, you know, I've worked closely on the Good Food Purchasing Pledge in LA and wanting to support a more local food system. We also have to be, you know, I mean, the reality is it is a global food system, and I personally don't want to give up chocolate. I'm sure people don't want to give up your coffee and tea, right? So there's still going to be some foods that we're going to have to trade for from other countries, and we need to make sure that that trade is fair for those farmers and farm workers and other producers in the other countries.
Well, a huge thank you to our panelists. I know I've learned so much today.